Hey, I'm Kev Kerr, Mr. Kerr, and welcome to Power Oversteer. And in today's episode, we're reviewing the 11th round of the 2013 FI Formula 1 World Championship, the Belgian Grand Prix. It wasn't the thriller that we normally expect from a Spa. In fact, it was a rather disappointing race, but we did occasionally see some fighting, especially in the midfield, and on one occasion it got a bit over the top. But at the front, it was business as usual, especially for one certain Red Bull driver who just strolled into victory. It was a Sunday drive for him. But to review this race, of course, we start with the race recap. So the race recap for the Belgian Grand Prix, but before we actually go into the race, we've got to perhaps review the most exciting part of this Grand Prix weekend for me, which was qualifying 3, where it was dry at the beginning and then it started to rain, and all the front runners had to come in after doing the one lap round the circuit, apart from Paul di Resta, who went out on intermediate tyres. And for most of the session, and it's like the gamble by Force India had paid out. They got di Resta his first pole position in F1. But unfortunately for him, it did dry out at the very back end of the session. So who was last over the line would likely get pole, and that guy was Lewis Hamilton. He got it by 0.2 of a second from Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber. But perhaps driver of the session was Nico Rosberg, who produced times in that kind of rainy period, in the intermediate period, and he was about half a second off di Resta in those intermediate tyres, much better conditions than they were for di Resta. So it was great that from Rosberg. Unfortunately, he didn't cross the line near the end, and he came in 4th ahead of di Resta, with Button 6th on the grid, Roman Grosjean 7th, Kimi Raikkonen 8th, and then the 2 Ferraris, Fernando Alonso 9th and Felipe Massa 10th. And so that was Q3, very exciting part of the weekend, and that's for me the most exciting part of the weekend. But let's go on to the race now. And at the start, most of the runners were on softs, open tyre choice for once on the grid for everyone. And so the only people starting on hards were the two Mauritius, who had got 15th and 16th on the grid, getting into Q2, along with Guido van der Garde, who got 3rd in Q1 when it started to dry up near the end of the session, and was 14th on the grid eventually in Q2. Daniel Ricciardo was also on hards, along with Esteban Gutierrez, who was on the back row along with Charles Pic. And so at the start, we saw a good start from Hamilton, from Vettel, from most of the front guys, apart from Mark Webber, who had clutch issues on the way to the grid. They couldn't quite get his brake clutch bite point, it seemed, correct, and they were just guessing in the dark before the start, and it seemed like they didn't guess well enough, it seems. And so Webber did have his usual start, it seems, of going back a couple of places. So did Paul di Resta from his grid start. He dropped as low as 12th, I think he said, but by the end of the first sector he had worked his way up to 7th. This is because Roman Grosjean went a bit wide on that source, and so he held up kind of the midfield pack, such as Felipe Massa, who dropped back down to 12th. And taking advantage of this was guys like Nico Hülkenberg, who got up to 8th at the start. But as we went through El Rouge, we saw Vettel got a better run through there than Hamilton, and at the top of the hill through Radion and down the Kemmel Straight, he got past Hamilton and into the lead, and that's where he would stay for most of the race. Van der Garde also had a typically good start. I've noticed that from Van der Garde. He tends to get good starts on that K-Joe, and stayed up there in that position of 14th for quite a few laps actually. And then as DRS took effect and as the stint went on, he dropped back, and he's near the back of the field eventually. But it was a very good start for Vettel, for Hamilton, and for Alonso as well. He starting down there in 9th up to 5th, got past Webber at El Rouge, getting some revenge for a couple of years ago. He DRS Button on lap 4, and then Webber got DRS Button on the next lap as well, following him through. Then on lap 6, Alonso DRS Rosberg for 3rd place at Prix, working well down the straights, it seems. Unfortunately, on lap 8, we did see Charles Pic retire with an oil leak. Well, we didn't see it, no one noticed for a few laps, but he did retire on lap 8 with an oil leak. Also on the lap, we saw Perez DRS Grosjean for 10th place, but he didn't leave a car's width going into the Coombe, and he was given a penalty for that. We also saw Massa get past Grosjean, trying to recover a bit, and that's because Grosjean had to go wide into the Coombe, and so he cut the course and he was a bit slow there. And then we saw the first pit stops around lap 10 for Massa, and then Hamilton and Alonso and all the front runners, with eventually Vettel pitting on lap 15. After Vettel pitted, Button just came out in front of him, but soon Vettel was past the Englishman as Button tried to do a one-stop, it seems, pitting on lap 18 and trying to make the hards last till the end. Didn't quite work out for them, but it was worth the gamble from McLaren, as it seemed like they had a car for once in this race. We also saw Alonso pass Hamilton when Vettel came out the pits. Hamilton just braked wide. I'm not sure if he did that on purpose to get DRS for the straight, but it didn't work as Alonso held that place. Then on lap 18 we saw some feisty fighting from the Force Injuries with Perez. Perez going into the source in front with Di Resta challenging him. Sutil just went down the inside of Di Resta and then round the outside of Perez into El Rouge to gain a couple of spots up to 11th place there. Meanwhile, for the Lotuses, it was quite anomalous. Grosjean, he was fighting with the midfield for the most part with Perez, and he was on the edge of the top 10. Meanwhile, Kimi Raikkonen, he was again anomalous around there in the lower parts of the top 10. He was fighting with Massa for 7th, and then this is after a first stint which was littered with left front brake dust, always appearing when he was braking. This is because he had debris there in the brake duct, and so it was overheating the brake, and so on the first start they managed to clear that, but unfortunately the damage was done. They couldn't get that brake to cool down, and so when he tried to pass Massa on lap 26, he went too far into the bus stop. He couldn't brake, he couldn't slow down, and so he went off. He managed to stop it in time to come back on course and go into the pit lane and retire for the first time since his return to Formula 1. The first time he's retired actually since Germany 2009, 38 races ago, and it ends his record points scoring streak as well, which lasted from last year after the Chinese Grand Prix when they did that gamble and it didn't work out. But since then, Raikkonen has always been in the points, always finished, but unfortunately ended here. A couple of laps later, on lap 28, we saw Esteban Gutierrez and Pastor Maldonado go side by side through Blanchimont. Calm down, no damage in Blanchimont. But Gutierrez did go wide, he did rejoin the track, regained his track position, and then outbraked himself a bit into the bus stop along with Maldonado. This forced Maldonado wide, and then Adrian Sutil tried to get past Maldonado, as he seemed to try and get into the pits, which was a bit of a strange choice considering he was on the inside of the corner. And he cleared the back of Sutil and went into the side of Di Resta, who had the whole side of his car, the radiator, until ripped out. It was very high damage for such a kind of slow speed impact. But that was the end of the race for Di Resta. His car was able to be picked up and recovered by the marshals without going to a safety car, and Maldonado pitted and then eventually got a penalty for that collision. And after this we also saw Sutil pass Gutierrez into El Rouge and doing his best Jarno Trulli, his old mate, impression of "you always have to leave the space." It was also Fernando Alonso that did that as well, wasn't it? But yeah, Sutil went past Gutierrez in El Rouge, not once, but he did that again later tries as well. Lap 30, we saw Vettel pit, just strolling at the front for the second and last time. Then a few laps later, we saw Button pit for the second time, as they couldn't get that one stop to work, it seemed. And it was in the podium positions, but with the time we would have lost on the tyres, it might not have worked out, just like it didn't work out for Romain Grosjean, who finished behind him. He was the only guy to do a one stop, lasting on the soft tyres till lap 22, despite losing up to 4 seconds per lap on the soft tyres near the end of the stint. They did the hards until the end of the race, even though they didn't quite last till the end of the race, it seemed. We also saw John Verne pass Nico Hulkenberg down the Coombe. Didn't really give that much space. Hulkenberg just a car's width, but then Verne forced him off the road in their Coombe on the way to Normandy. No penalty for him though, so good consistency in the race from the stewards. On that 40, we saw Massa DRS Grosjean for 7th on his fresher tyres, on the tyres that Grosjean had tried to make last as well. And then the next lap, we saw Ricardo DRS Perez, who actually pitted around that 19 or 18 for his final stint for the hard tyres. So he's trying to make them last till the end, but just could not hold on those tyres. And so you got DRS for the last point by Daniel Ricciardo and the Toro Rosso. But at the front, it was Sebastian Vettel who won by 16.8 seconds from Fernando Alonso. Over 10 seconds behind Alonso was Lewis Hamilton, with Nico Rosberg right behind him. Mark Webber was 5th after a frustrating race, it seemed, stuck behind Rosberg's gearbox for most of it. Button was 6th ahead of Massa in 7th, with Grosjean in 8th. Adrian Sutil, good couple points for him in the Force India, 9th ahead of Daniel Ricciardo. Perez in the end was 8 seconds off that point in 11th, with John Eichver in 12th. Nico Hülkenberg in 13th. It seemed he lost time in the middle stint on those hard tyres. Esteban Gutierrez was behind his team leader in 14th, just 12 seconds behind him, with Valtteri Bottas in 15th. Guido van der Garde was 16th ahead of Maldonado on 17th, even though Maldonado did have that penalty for that collision with the Resta. Jules Bianchi was 18th, with Max Chilton in last in 19th, the only guy that tried. Van der Garde, Maldonado and Bianchi were lapped once. The 3 retirements: Paul di Resta, Kimi Raikkonen and Charles Pic. And so in the championship, Sebastian Vettel leads by 46 points from Alonso, with Hamilton now 12 points behind Alonso. Raikkonen drops to 4th with 134 points, with Webber rounding up the top 5 with 115 points, 82 points behind Vettel. And it's Red Bull who dominate the constructors with 312 points, ahead of Mercedes on 235, Ferrari with 218, Lotus with 187, and back in the top 5 is McLaren with 65 points ahead of Force India. And so that is the race recap of the Belgian Grand Prix. Let's do the winners and losers now. So the winners and losers from the Belgian Grand Prix. Let's firstly go into the teams and then talk about other issues that were surrounding the Belgian Grand Prix there. Red Bull, big winners. Sebastian Vettel, big winner. You know, again, finishing ahead of his title rivals with that win, extending the gap, and 46 points. With the Asian rounds coming up, which should suit him and the Red Bull, such as Singapore, Japan, Korea, India, it's looking impossible for him not to get that 4th title now. He's just looked supreme all season. It has been probably his best season so far in F1, which is a bit scary now that he's reaching his prime and he's about to win his 4th title. Who knows what's going to happen in the future, especially with the changing regulations next year. But Sebastian Vettel looking supreme. Mark Webber in 5th, he ruled that start. He dropped him back into the pack, and he had to pass Button, and then he was just glued behind Rosberg for most of the race. Just could not get past the Mercedes. Mercedes much better on the straights, and Webber, even with DRS, wasn't really gaining much, it seems. So yeah, it just did not work out for Webber, especially that start, which kind of dictated the rest of his race. Ferrari, very encouraging for Alonso there in 2nd, but way behind Vettel still. But it's encouraging for Ferrari that they were ahead of Mercedes and ahead of Lotus, it seemed, around this track. So yeah, very encouraging for them heading into their home race at Monza in Italy. And so yeah, 2nd place for Alonso. I think he'll take that, especially after the qualifying where he was down in 9th. Massa in a solid 7th. Again, that start kind of cost him and kind of dictated the rest of his race as well. A bit like Webber, he's fighting his way through the pack and eventually got past Grosjean. And so yeah, it was a good race for Massa, but he'd probably need to do better if he wants to keep that job for next year. But even if he's probably lost that job, he wants to advertise himself in the shop window, for other drives. And so yeah, he needs to do better basically. But again, it was a solid drive from him. Mercedes 3rd and 4th. I think they might take that because Red Bull just looked much better, and Rosberg was very anomalous in 4th, but he was just behind Hamilton in the end, and Hamilton just kind of fell back in that race. behind Vettel and then behind Alonso, and so yeah, it just didn't quite work out the race for Hamilton to be challenging for the win. And I think Rosberg will be happy with that fourth on the grid. I mean, there's not much better they could have done, I think, in the race. Lotus, and it was not a good race for them at all. Kimi Raikkonen, I said, lower reach of the top 10 for most of it, fighting with Massa for 7th. You know, always had brake issues for most of that race as well, with the debris caught in that left front brake, and so yeah, he just couldn't get the maximum out of the car because of that, and so yeah, eventually he had to retire. So very disappointed for him, and now 63 points behind Vettel. He might now be out the title race. You need Vettel to have very unlucky races like he did with this Belgian race to even be back in contention. So yeah, that might be a very costly retirement for Raikkonen in the title race. Grosjean in 8th again. It's actually surprising for Grosjean. He completed a lap here for the first time ever in a Formula 1 car. Remember in 2009 he got caught up in the crash at Leclerc, which involved Hamilton and Button, if I remember off the top of my head. And then last year, of course, he crashed at the first corner. Didn't even make the first corner. Yeah, that sort. And so yeah, it's good to see he actually finished the race. He came in 8th. One stop just did not work out for them. I think a 2 stop he might have been able to even get 6th away from Button. But you know, McLaren looked very strong in Button's hands here. And so yeah, again, strategy call just did not work out for Lotus. Left them out way too long in that first stint, and the hard tyres didn't quite last the end of the race. So yeah, they went medium, hard, medium. Might have been a bit better. And McLaren, yes, Button, 6th on the grid, 6th in the race. I think he'll take that. Looking much better, even at a lap, or almost a lap in the McLaren. And so yeah, looking much stronger here, 40 seconds off the winner. When they've been, for the most part, finishing over a minute behind the winner. I think that's very good for McLaren. Good sign of progress, and you know, that going into Monza, they could maybe expect even a top 5 there, I think, with how good that car looks around Spa in Button's hands. And Perez's hands, they look very good as well. Unfortunate for him, he got that penalty, even though it was his fault. He didn't leave the car's width. He just came over for no reason, trying to take the entry line into the corner. This was what Martin Brundle was arguing, like taking the entry line into the corner. He wasn't defending anymore, he was past Grosjean, but that's kind of silly thinking. He's still trying to keep the position going into their Coombe, as we saw later with Vern and Hulkenberg. You can both go through their Coombe, maybe not on the exit as Vern pushed Hulkenberg wide, but yeah, you can have 2 cars go into there, and Perez didn't allow that to happen by moving over a bit too much. But he did show good pace otherwise. Tried to make that tyres last until the end of the race for 25 laps around that. Didn't quite work out to get a point, but you know, he did show good pace here. He wasn't quite as good as Button, but it seemed like he had good pace and could have finished behind him in 7th if he didn't have that penalty. So yeah, a bit more encouraging for Perez in the McLaren. Force India, even though they lost 5th to McLaren, there's some more signs they're going forward after that poor run in Nürburgring and Hungary. They got 9th place with Sutil, very aggressive in this race. Sutil, it was great to see. I think he did 3 passes into El Rouge, 2 on Gutierrez and 1 on Perez as well. And so yeah, Sutil, great aggression, and he just made that strategy work out. He was running with De Resta, and De Resta was falling back. He was kind of stuck there, but he took advantage of that crash, took advantage of Gutierrez being weaving all over the place. I don't know why he's doing that, and hopefully he's been reprimanded because of that. But yeah, good race from Sutil. For De Resta otherwise, as I said, he fell back at the beginning on the start, didn't get a good start away from the grid, then made it up, and he was running in the first stint in 7th place for most of it, and he just fell back in the middle stint, and that's where he got into trouble with, you know, with Maldonado, with Gutierrez as well. And so yeah, very strange race for De Resta, how he kind of moved back into the clutches of a teammate. Well, Sutil looked much better in his Force India. So yeah, De Resta, no, missed opportunities in the race, missed opportunity in qualifying as well, just dry enough at the end of that qualifying session. But the gamble did work out for Force India in the end in qualifying. Even though they didn't get pole, they got 5th on the grid ahead of Ferrari, ahead of Lotus, so it did kind of work out for them, that gamble to get high up on the grid. But yeah, in the race, be questioning why the rest fell backwards. Toro Rosso and Daniel Ricciardo got a point where the speculation is it seems like he's signed, sealed and delivered to Red Bull next season. So getting a point when there's that speculation around, you know, just if it's not signed, it's maybe edged them towards him signing him. It was a very good race from Ricciardo, really moved up from his grid slot, 19th on the grid to get into 10th. Great race from him, and this is coming from a team where we normally see Vern having the better race pace, having the better race. But this time it was Ricciardo, and he really did deserve that point in the end. And he almost caught Sutil in the end, 4 seconds behind him. So yeah, great race for Ricciardo. Really made it up in that middle stint, it seemed. You know, he was still there near in the midfield behind the likes of Maldonado and Gutierrez. Then in the middle stint really made it up, and then in the end, caught Perez and got that final point. Meanwhile, John Vern, he was just stuck in the midfield. He was just stuck there. He couldn't really make up many places, it seemed. And in the end, he did get past Hulkenberg. I do question why he didn't get a penalty when we did see Perez get a penalty for not leaving the cars with to the other car, and Vern just forced Hulkenberg off in the Coombe. Took too much speed into the second apex there, and he didn't even bother to straighten the car up. He just forced Hulkenberg off the road. And yeah, I do question the consistency of the stewards during that race. Much like I have to question consistency of stewards overall as well. But yeah, unlucky for, well, not really unlucky for Vern, but just an average race for Vern, it seemed. Sauber and Hulkenberg did great in the first half of that race. He was running 8th, I think, before he pitted. And then he went on a hard stint, and it just did not work out for him. He dropped back, and it was a bit like early in the season where they would have these good early stints and then just drop back in the races, and it happened again to Hulkenberg here. Gutierrez actually looked a bit better than Hulkenberg, dare I say, at times in this race, and maybe could have got a point if he wasn't a bit too aggressive with Maldonado. There, if he just he ran off track. He was off track at Blanchimont, had all 4 wheels off the track, and still came back on to hold that position and just outbraked himself, trying to keep Maldonado back. And then of course in that chaos it led Sutil to come through and pass him. So Gutierrez, yeah, a bit too aggressive, and he was weaving in front of Sutil in the braking, so that's sort, you don't do that. That's what you do in junior form. They then learn to grow out of it. He still hasn't grown out of it, it seems. So yeah, I do argue that you should have given that place to Maldonado, and maybe would have avoided that chaos that took out the rest in the race. But yeah, it's better for Gutierrez though, it seems, in this European part of the season. So the track he's familiar with, so maybe it'd be good at Monza as well. Williams, Maldonado, what can we say? Going to the pits when you're on the inside with 2 other cars on the outside, not the wisest decisions he's ever done. And I did defend him at the time, going like it looked like a racing incident, but after hearing what he said on the BBC on the interview, saying is my lap to pit, I had to go to the pits. Not as wisest decision, just go round for another lap, God. And you were on the inside. If you wanted to go to the pits, you would have stuck right behind Gutierrez and maybe gone and just braked a bit early and kept to the outside of the bus stop chicane, so you have that run into the pit lane. So yeah, Maldonado, I defended him at the time, but now looking back at what he said after the race, I can't defend him. I can't defend that penalty. That penalty seems a bit justified as he was going to the pits, even though he did get the back of Sutil, and I would say Sutil came across on him a bit. But yeah, I can't really defend Maldonado now after what he said after the race for that instant. It's just another incident with Maldonado where his brain went into sleep mode and he just didn't think of all those around him. He said he didn't see the rest. Well, you're fighting with a force injury there. You just hit one. How can you not see that? But it was unfortunate he did hit the rest though, as he just clipped the back of Sutil, so kind of no control going into the rest of that. But yeah, it was encouraging pace from Maldonado before that. As I say, maybe he could have snuck a point, but I'm not sure if he could, because it looked like Ricciardo had a better stint in the middle there. But yeah, it was okay for Maldonado, and then Williams really did get caught out in Q1 in qualifying there. And Bottas finished ahead of him in 15th, just too anonymous, so he can't really judge his ways there. But he was just 7 seconds behind Gutierrez, so it looked like a good, okay race for Bottas. Like Maldonado had the edge on him a bit here at Spa. Now we go to the newer teams. We go to Cater and Van der Garde. Great weekend again from him. It looked like a great weekend from him again anyway. Q1, taking advantage of that dry track, got the timing just right in qualifying to get third on that in Q1 and then get 14th on the grid ahead of the Mauritius in Q2. You couldn't have asked much more from him in qualifying. And in the race, again, as I said, he seems to be a very good starter, a bit like Kovalainen was in these Caterham / Team Lotus. He stuck up there and then he just fell back a bit, and 16th, you couldn't have asked much better from him. Unfortunately for the team, Charles Pic didn't have much time to shine all week on that 8, and he got caught out in Q1 in qualifying as well. Didn't really get the timing right there for him, but Van der Garde looking much better now. Hungary, very good weekend, and now a very good weekend at Spa. If he can continue this to the end of the season, he might actually have a very even season with Charles Pic, which I'm not sure I really expected. I expected Pic to be a touch better, but it's like Van der Garde's finally getting suited to F1, so that's very good to see. And Marussia, Jules Bianchi, Max Chilton, both in Q2, couldn't ask much better than that. And for Bianchi, again having the legs on Chilton, the only guy to be that twice in the race, and I think he had a penalty for ignoring blue flag, so that's probably why the cause is. And he'd never looked that far behind Bianchi, about 20 seconds ish, but still not quite on the pace of Bianchi, and that's worrying for Chilton if he wants to really justify why he's got this seat instead of having his father's money here. He wants to justify it on pace, and kind of not doing that at the moment. And Bianchi, I think it was around 30 seconds behind Van der Garde for most of the race, and then it stretched near the end as they all got that. You couldn't have asked really that much better from Bianchi. The Mauritius now the worst car on the grid, so yeah, got some homework for Mauritius to do to catch up Caterham for the rest of the season. And we're coming up to Singapore, where there's bound to be a few incidents in safety cars. That's where Mauritius got the edge last season in that battle for 10th. And so yeah, they've got to look over their shoulders at that Mauritius, that they don't have the pace of Caterham, and that they are coming up to races where there will be safety cars, there will be quite a few incidents. And Brazil as well, the last race this season, as we saw, with Caterham nicking at 10th place as well. So that is kind of rolling down the stretch for Mauritius, that they don't have the pace of Caterham now. So that is my winners and losers for this Belgian Grand Prix. Let's do of the race. So of the race and driver of the race, well, we got a few candidates: Vettel, Alonso, maybe even Hamilton and Rosberg there. Jenson Button getting 6th, Adrian Searle getting 9th, and Ricciardo getting the final point. Van der Garde as well getting 16th, very strong, and ahead of Maldonado, even though Maldonado did have a penalty there. But I think you do just have to give it to, I think I'm going to give it to Alonso actually ahead of Vettel. I think Alonso had to do a bit more in that race, and even though the DRS is very overpowered in Spa, I don't know why they have 2 DRS zones. There's no point having DRS zones at Spa. But yeah, Alonso, he did well, getting a great start again in that Ferrari up to 5th, and then quickly disposing Button and Rosberg, and then getting past Hamilton, who went wide for whatever reason, and just holding on to that position, actually giving Vettel a bit of a fight at times, even though Vettel could stretch it out on that last stint, it seems. So yeah, I think I'll give driver of the race to Alonso. Team of the race, who can I give it to? Red Bull maybe for 1st and 5th, Mercedes for 3rd and 4th there. Maybe, yeah, there's not actually many more candidates. McLaren maybe for 6th and 11th, looked much better as well. But I think I might have to give it to Red Bull, just because this is a track where you don't normally expect them to do that well. It's a track with long straights, but even though they do own that middle sector, and it did seem like they had a much better package this year than they had last year. And even though And so, yeah, this is a track you don't normally expect Red Bull to do that bad at, to, you know, fight for podiums and not really fight for wins. But this year they just had the package right, it seems, and that's kind of why heading into Monza, where you don't expect Red Bull to maybe even fight for a podium just to get solid points. But with how good this low downforce package looks like, maybe they will fight for the podium, even for the win as well. So yeah, I think I'll have to give it to Red Bull for team of the race. Overtake of the race, there weren't many that stood out really, apart from one guy, Adrian Setil. As I said, he did 3 overtakes into El Rouge. He did 2 on Gutierrez, but it's the other one where he overtook the rest out of La Source and then round the outside of Perez going into El Rouge. I think I'll have to give it to Adrian Setil for that overtake. And you know, it's just great awareness, situational awareness. You know, you saw Perez and the rest to really fight into La Source, and he just held back, took the tight line, got the great exit. Maybe used a bit of curves to get past the rest and get a nice run on Perez into El Rouge, but he stuck it on the outside, and well, Perez and the rest were too busy fighting. He just stuck it there and got 2 places in one move. I have to give it to Setil for that very fine move in a race that didn't have very fine moves at all. So that is my review of a very disappointing Belgian Grand Prix. It was very poor, and as I said on Twitter, I thought I'd never see a Belgian Grand Prix be the worst Grand Prix of a season, but that one might be it. So dreadful. Hopefully it's much better in Monza, at the Italian Grand Prix in a couple of weeks, or in a week as I've recorded this. But before that, of course, there's the Grand Prix of Baltimore this weekend in IndyCar, and that's going to be perhaps the opposite of what happened at Spa. It's going to be very entertaining, as it always is, at the streets of Baltimore, with ridiculous chicanes as well. One that makes the Singapore thing look like a very sensible corner. It's a very strange situation out there with a makeshift chicane over some railway tracks. And so I'll be back with a review of that in Power Oversteer, and I hope to put out some gameplay before then, as I haven't really put out that much this week. So salamat for watching. So till then, cheerio.